Hey, everybody, welcome to the Be Extraordinary show where your story is your superpower. I'm Garrett Pleganpole, and here we look at the stories of remarkable people who turn their challenges into gifts and their pains into passion and into profit. Um, because when you lean into your truth, that's where the magic really comes into fruition. And we're so excited to have you here. So let's get started. I want to introduce my guest, Banah Winn. Banah, would you please share where you're coming from, where you are, and how you spend your days?
Hello. So currently I'm in Portland, Oregon, but I've been fairly nomadic for past few years. And um, how do I spend my days? It depends on what phase, but currently I'm in a building phase right now. So I've been making a lot of content online. Um, I've been I just finished a course, two courses, and I've been working with clients one-on-one on intuitive and psychic development
Mhm.
and also belief work as well. And I'm a lifelong musician and artist. So uh, my main project right now, my self project is I call it like that's my own artist boot camp. So I'm like going to the gym every day, running every day, doing like art practice. I
Mm,
dyed my hair green. I'm like fully committing to the character,
mm,
this character and this vision that I have in my mind. And so it's this slow build in which to not only produce music but visual art as well that sort of represents a character that can speak the language of upliftment and togetherness. And I've also just got off of 6 months on the road touring, leading conscious sing-alongs, and that's kind of led me to my next iteration, which is still to do that, but to do it from a bit more of like an artist standpoint. Yeah,
mm.
that's where I'm at.
So I've been to several of your harmonies, your conscious sing-along events, and I'd be very curious to hear how this next iteration is coming together with the boot camp and this, inner image manifesting in the physical world. What does that look like, the next stage of the journey, do you think?
Um, it looks like, I guess I'm speaking from a context of what it has been. It looks fully embodied. Um, it's more colorful. It's like an even deeper and fuller commitment to the character. And I think that the harmony and the conscious sing-alongs I was doing, it was um, hmm, what am I trying to say? It was just this beautiful birth of all these things that came together. Um, my skills as an intuitive and my lifelong journey as far as being able to empathically read a room and also just flow, going into situations with no plan, and also really wanting to do things that are very interactive. And so the next and then of course being a musician as well. So the next iteration of that is really I feel like I got to a certain place as like a musician and artist where I come back to like this lifelong pursuit of wanting to create something that I feel is really great. And and I don't want to lose that sense of play. I love that sense of play, but sort of the level of play I was in doing harmony, I think I scratched that itch, and now I'm in search of deeper depths. So okay, so what does it look like? It looks like a yeah, like an incredible album of music that is both technically precise, but even more than that, that you really deeply feel. Art that is really moving in itself. I think that's one of the beauties of the day and age that we're in, and we can do this on social media. I heard someone describe it this way, that it's like your fourth dimensional self, because you're taking a recording of you, and then that version of you is going out onto the internet, and you don't have to be there talking to each one of those individual people. Like I had a few videos on TikTok in the last month that did like got a lot of views. One in particular that I think got like 600,000 views. And I think that, well, wow, that would take a lot of time for me to go and individually talk to 600,000 people. But there's a version of me that's even right now during this conversation going out and saying that message. And so I think music and art is the same way. And it's really about, yeah, transmitting and bringing our expression and our frequency and what we want to see more of in the world, and doing it in a more efficient way, and not being afraid to do that, because like I think this earth is such an interesting environment. We've come here to create, except everyone has come here to create, and then everyone has opinions about what everyone else creates. So then it's easy to get like into the mode where you're like, oh, I don't want to be too loud and step on someone else's creation. But that doesn't even make any sense, because you creating what you want to create doesn't necessarily take away from anyone else's. So yeah, I think it's like coming into the full embodiment of like, oh, this is how I want my life to be and my slice of reality to be, and really, really fully going for it until I die.
Mhm.
And and while simultaneously accepting and allowing any and everyone else to have their own journey. Like if anyone else disagrees with me, and they, or they don't like what I'm doing, instead of trying to defend myself, I've just been practicing being like, in my mind, being like, that's okay. And then just moving on to what I think I'm interested in, you know?
Mhm.
So,
I can see why you go viral on TikTok. It's so many gems in there.
oh,
To
thank you.
unpack. Yeah, it's like one of those timeless messages that you capture so well. What I know of Ibana is that you're an incredibly talented, you're a visionary, right? And you infuse your intuition with your musical gifts as your gift to the world. And it's a very powerful thing. I wanted to ask you, when was the turning point where you really stepped into that in your life? Was there a before and after? And what was that like?
Intuitively or what?
Yeah, you could say when you started, just stepped into this version of you where you were like full sending what you're here to do, and what it was like before that, or did you always know, or was there a clear moment?
Oh, I've always been full send, but there's been different variations of it. And so I think it's been like, I even was looking through right before this call, actually, I was like looking through, just briefly scrolling through my whole Instagram, and there's like three or four different versions of me. There's three or four different like
Mm.
eras where you're like, oh, that's that Banah, and this is this Banah. And then there was even more ones before that, but I think I had deleted all my pictures before a certain year,
Mm.
which is too bad. It would be interesting to see that as well. But um, yeah, I think it's up. I've always been that way in some regard, but it's like the depths in which you're willing to do it. And I like to think this time around, um, there's like more of a humbleness and an openness to learn, and like really look at all the stuff that I might have skipped over. I think I like things that happen really fast, and so there's been an inclination in my life to get impatient and kind of skip over things. People maybe call that bypassing. I don't necessarily agree with that terminology, um, because I don't think we can actually bypass anything. We just ignore things, and then they continue to resonate and reflect in our life. But they're unignorable. It's just something that we're not moving through, you know? So, um, yeah. So a deeper form of just going back to sort of the roots and looking at like, um, I don't know, it just comes back to being an artist, man. I think that's like the biggest thing I've come back to is like intuition and everything. My whole spiritual journey, everything which like led me away from music, it's like the hero's journey. That stuff is so cyclical, and it led me right back to the same place, which is like, oh, I'm still who I am. At my core, like the shell may change, and the way it looks may change, and the embodiment change may change a little bit, but like there are deep core things within me that like I I can't and I don't want to deny, and like sometimes even question like why, like what is even the point of art,
Mm.
you know, like why, like what is the why, what is my why? And I've always said my why is expression, you know.
Mm.
But then when I looked really deep enough, I was like, oh man, why is it expression? Expression, our why for expression is because we want to be understood. So it's really connection, which it is. I think it connection for everyone, but I almost was in this like lifelong denial that I was like, oh, it's expression. Yeah, but why do you want to express? It's because you want to connect,
Mm.
you know? So yeah, and but it doesn't necessarily even have to be connecting with another person or connecting with an audience that thinks like what you make is amazing. I don't think it's necessarily even about that. It's you're connecting with
Mm.
you know the higher power
Mm.
and creation itself. And if we're not creating what we love, then we're either having a mediocre, frustrating, or fucking excruciating experience. And this statement I make now goes beyond art because, or I could say it goes beyond what we think of as art, because my life experience is art. Your life experience is art. Every person who's watching this, their life experience is art. That's your creation. That's your creation. It is a reflection of the culmination of all the beliefs and thoughts and circumstances of your past being reflected to you in a beautiful delay, an
Mm.
orchestrated delay filled with variables of free will on the other side. And so the whole point is like we're all creators and we're all artists. Even if you're in finance, even if you're doing spreadsheets,
Mm.
you're a fucking artist because that's your creation. That's your creation, your life experience. Even if you're miserable and you're depressed, that's your beautiful piece of artwork. So love that shit.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So again, lots to unpack there. The layers, the piece of yourself that stays amidst the changes on the surface. And I listened to a David White poem recently on death, and it was talking about how death never comes to us, it always comes to someone else. And it was referring to, you only see other people die, really, but it also, when it arrives on our doorstep, it doesn't hit us, it hits who we were, who we thought we were throughout our life. Uh, sorry, it doesn't meet who we thought we were. It hits our authentic per self that never got to see the light of sun.
Mm,
And that version, I feel like, is relatable to what you were sharing about that core identity, that core piece of you, and then tying it all back to, whether there was a distinctive moment that you stepped into this lifestyle or was it just like unpacking the depths and getting more and more deep and more willing to share that authentic version And then that ultimately is how we feel truly connected to the world and our surroundings. Does that feel right for you? Is that sort of the journey that you've been on, just ta shedding layers of inauthenticity and finding ways to let that light of yours shine?
Yeah, but I don't think anything was ever inauthentic.
Hmm.
I think it was just less consciously chosen, less aligned, you know? That makes sense. Maybe not, but
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
When you go through these variations or iterations of more and more depth, how do you feel like that impacts the world around you?
And what, okay, this is how I feel. It's a more accurate reflection
Hmm.
because everybody is in their created their own reality based on their own biases. Like I don't see you, I see me when I
Hmm.
look at you. And so um, I think that the more aware we become and the less wrapped up in that, we can see others doing that to us and we can be okay. Like when someone, what's that classic story where like the guy's son almost gets drafted and then breaks his leg and they're like, oh, good. And then something bad happens to him and he's just, and for every, whether it's good or bad, he's like, okay, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. So it's like, it's almost like the physiological structure of our body is like has this like reward mechanism in it. Like people approve of you. I mean, I've seen this like even just like reading comments online. Someone said people sending love, and I'm like, I feel love, and people are like, F this guy, he's crazy, and then I'm like, eh. And
Hmm.
then I get to the point where I'm like, I don't have to feel any different about either
Hmm.
of those, but I just get to make a choice where I double down,
Hmm.
you know? And so yeah, I think my point is that we just what it means is we allow for others to react to us whichever way they are. And it doesn't have to be a sense of control over us.
Hmm.
If someone acts positively to something I do, I don't have to let that control me. If someone acts negatively, I don't have to let that control me. If someone acts neutrally, I don't have to let that control me. That doesn't change anything about me at
Hmm.
all. And so I think yeah, it's in a way, I think that's really doing a service because no matter how anyone reflects or reacts to your authenticity, you're allowing them to have their experience. Like if someone has a negative
Hmm.
reaction to your authenticity, and then you go and you go, hey, I'm going to explain to you why you're wrong for that.
Hmm.
I feel like that's almost a disservice to the person.
Hmm.
They should be allowed to, freedom is the most important thing, and they should be allowed to have whatever experience they want to have, you know? I mean, I almost don't even bring up the extreme example. Someone would be like, well, what happens when someone attacks you, like physically? It's like, okay, well, leave. And also that's a whole other conversation about vibration, which again, it gets into defending,
Hmm.
you know? Like even bringing that up, that's the brain being like, no, I need to find something to defend myself
Hmm.
against. That belief system is contorted in a way where that perspective is almost too far away from essentially what I'm trying to articulate, that it's just too big of a bridge to link without defending oneself. And so that's the whole thing is like you just need to allow if people if people argue their limitations, it's like you have to allow it because that's actually the healthiest thing for them. Because if someone's arguing their own limitation and then you argue against them, what happens when you're arguing with someone? You double down on what you're saying. You're actually hurting and reinforcing that person's limitation when you argue against them, which is people argue for anything, you know. So I think it's just being allowing, being authentic is allowing, um, and not worrying so much. And within that allowing, it's okay to have preferences. We get to decide where we put our energy. And so those that are, loving and accepting and supportive and benefiting and appreciative, that's the kind of energy exchange. Everything's an energy exchange. Equal amount of energy is being exchanged in fighting someone versus appreciating each other. It just so happens that one is enjoyable to me.
Mhm.
There's people in a state of consciousness, and there's times in our life where we feel so low that arguing with someone else feels good to us because it's contextual. We feel this way, and arguing feels here. And I'm not saying one is better than other, but it's just for the sake of, a physical representation. Okay, so now if I'm normally in appreciation, it doesn't feel good to go and argue with people, kind of thing, So it's not making it has nothing to do with worth or better than one or other. They're simply just different perspectives. From one perspective, arguing feels better. From another perspective, arguing feels worse. And so, depending on where we're at, both in our own personal journey and just like our day to day, our emotional state. Um, yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with anything. It's just it's just preference.
Mhm.
And for me personally, I prefer to align myself with people that appreciate because that's what feels good to me. And I'm gonna do the same to them.
Mhm. I've heard that you could walk through a field of thorny flowers and get scratches, or you could put on a pair of boots and walk through the same field and be, unscathed. And it's like that pair of boots in this context was referring to being like practicing mindfulness. But I guess it applies too of like choosing how you see something is something that you can put on any moment.
I
The
agree. And where we choose to put our intention.
right.
And I like the mindfulness part because it's like that's where the real learning is, where we start to see the unconscious programming. We say, oh wait, I'm putting way more attention into this one thing versus this other thing. You see this so many artists say, oh, you could get 1,000 people saying they love it, and it's that one person who says it's crap.
hmm
Why does that hold more weight? You know,
hmm
it
hmm
doesn't. It doesn't actually hold more weight. It just feels more pronounced because it's it's also, I don't think, natural for us. It's unloving for us to feel that way, you know? So
hmm
things that are off have to feel louder so that we can, you know, get our hand off the hot stove.
Yeah,
But if
but
we didn't even have that, think about how much we'd be messing ourselves up. We're already messing ourselves up and how
Mhm.
bad it feels.
Mhm.
If it didn't feel bad,
Right. Yeah. Well, that's something you always have said, and I always think about it. Like, if it doesn't feel good, it can't be true.
yeah,
That's always been very helpful. On the note of meeting people with with your authenticity and accepting them in how they respond to it, there's sort of this idyllic fantasy. I'm not sure if it's the end result of the spiritual journey, but effectively where one person's authenticity meets another person's authenticity. And the question is, if we're fully in our, Buddha nature, Christ center, however whatever you want to call it, would there just be like oh, hi, how are you? Or would there be some internal or inherent conflicts in people's authenticity, or would it, because then the deeper layers you get into it, in the Bhagavad Gita text like that, it's talking about the Brahman and the Atman and how behind all the individual, there's a singular um, energy that connects all of us. So at some point, do you just meet? I think Ram Dass says, like, you're in there, I'm in here. How'd you do that? Um,
It's already happening. We're just not aware of it.
right, right. That's totally fair. And to say that the concept or illusion of separation is what really we're really experiencing. It's like a child having a nightmare. And then in Buddhism, there are three paths that I've heard to, attain liberation. One is where the individual goes first and then everybody else follows. The second is where everybody goes first and then the individual follows. And then the third is everybody goes together. I've always thought about how fascinating it is to relate to the journey in that way and see and sort of check in with other quote other beings and like see where I'm still stuck in judgments or perceptions of separation and saying, "Oh, you guys still don't know what you're talking about, do you?" But then it's really, on another level, they're all already there, and it's me that's behind, and they're just waiting for me. So it's a real trip. Oh man.
But there's nowhere to go. It's here.
Yeah, yeah. So on the note that we're all here already, what drives you? What motivates you to continue creating and finding new ways to express yourself? What's behind it all?
I don't know. I keep waking up every day.
Yeah.
I wake up and I'm like, oh, still here.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess there's something to do.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I just love it so much, man. I
Mm.
really enjoy it.
Hmm.
I love creating.
Mm.
I love I love yeah, I love art and I love music. I just love music so much. I love understanding new things. Like I said, the whole all of reality is it's art. So um yeah, it's the love of that, you know? It's changed from it used to be trying to get somewhere or get it to look a certain way,
Mhm.
but it's there's nothing to get. There's only experiences to pass through. There's no ownership of anything
Mhm.
in this lifetime.
Mhm.
You don't, people say we claim we own things, but everything is temporary, you know? So what a beautiful thing to get to pass through these experiences. Even if you're passing through an experience, for 30 years, 50 years, you're still passing through it. But so I think it's two things. One, it's yeah, I love creating and I love understanding, and there's certain things that like my human personality just likes. And so um yeah, I like to experience my preferences and indulge in those, and also, mm, there's something really miraculous and wonderful about having a vision of something that seems like so far away and so intangible, and then going and living it, like
Mm,
crossing that precipice, which is precisely the reason why I think we've come here, is because the dream seems so real, and we wanted to experience what it felt like to be inside of our creation and to live them. And so it's like every desire that we have, and every vision that we have, and everything that we want to create. That exact process is like the exact process that inspired us to manifest and become these avatars.
mm,
That's
interesting.
that's quite literally what brought us here, you
Wow.
know,
Mm,
and that's what keeps us coming back. Um, because the how do I put this? The fulfillment and the experience of having the hands in the clay and living that is exponentially more valuable to us than any amount of perceived suffering that is endured here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. You know,
yeah.
you see a lot of people, or I see some people who are like, just like, get me out of here.
Mm.
And like, I certainly have those days or those moments. Um, but all we're saying is like, get me out of this suffering, you
Mm,
know,
mm,
um, which inevitably is like the ultimate launching of a desire, which quite literally will take you somewhere else. Which is the funny part is the mechanism and the state of trying to get out of here is precisely, which is the launching of desire, precisely the thing that brought us here.
mm, mm.
Which is like, that's, I don't know, that's a whole other conversation about spiritual evolution. People trying to get out of here so they can evolve to a different thing. But it's like, but that's what brought you here.
Yeah.
So that's not going to get you out of here.
Right.
Actually, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
You just doubling down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, he called this the process of individuation, where God dreams himself to be separate and then returns to himself or itself when the day is done. And it's this interesting uh, I don't know, happenstance where, and I'd be curious how you define it, and if it's the quest for love and the quest to return to God that is behind all of these desires. And that's the language of intuition, being the pulling back towards God, almost as if there's a GPS or map of that our higher self or soul carries that communicates to us through these, oh, this will feel more like love, so I'll go in that direction, and that's really pulling us back to God.
It always is. And within that contains everything that you've ever desired in its full
Mm,
creation and fulfillment.
mm, mm-hmm, mm,
It's like one could say, when we look away from God, when we look into contrast, we create.
mm,
When we look towards Him, we are fulfilled by what
mm.
we have created.
Wow.
It blew your mind.
Jeez, Banah. Oh, I feel like at the end of this, I'm just gonna float into a
I don't
nice.
know, whatever that did to you. I just felt it. Something just popped out of your head. Why did you need that message? Did I need that message? We all needed that message.
Yeah, I mean, uh, it's
So,
an
Nick, go
yeah.
on. Sorry.
Well, one time Paramahansa Yogananda was asked, "Do you believe in hell?" And he said, "Do I believe in hell? Where do you think you are?" And it's definitely been something I've needed to hear, Banah, because I feel almost like a fool sometimes for whether it's vision boarding or, visualizing or affirmations, etc., attempting to create these structures or experiences on this planet, projecting how I think it ought to look. Whereas, just like Alan Watts would say, if you can't enjoy the present moment, you're not going to enjoy the future moment whenever you get there. And that ties back to this idea that, yeah, sure, you could create something on Earth. It's still hell.
Hmm.
Um, and just there's this, I'd be curious what your thought on it was, because it's one might like, I think in the Course in Miracles, it would say that this is the ego that wants to put God behind some accomplishment. And only when you get there will you feel the peace and fulfillment of God. But the Holy Spirit would say, God is available to you right now. And in fact, the only reason this world exists is because your ego has convinced you to subscribe to the belief that you need to be here to do something in order to get the feeling of peace from God. Whereas effectively the experience of salvation is available to us in any moment, where, like we were saying earlier, it's a surprise that we still wake up here, because at a certain point you're like, how fulfilled in God can I be? And like the Course says that what happens when you're living in that fulfillment is that this dream that's really a nightmare, feels like a nightmare sometimes, of lack and separation and fear, uh, becomes a happy dream when you just live in that fulfillment. And whenever that voice comes up that says, "Oh, you'll do it, you'll get it later," just coming back and recognizing that as a false teacher and listening to the voice of truth internally. But then it's always this like sense of uncomfort for me of, um, and maybe it's an impatience thing. I'm not sure what it is. Do you ever feel impatient with your like still waking up here and, when is this? Yeah, I guess that's why I needed to hear it.
Yeah, I think everyone experiences those things. But, no, not even but. It's all here. And you just articulated it in a certain way,
Mm.
which is that this is this is the place, this is the experience of both creation and fulfillment of creation.
Hmm.
So it is, I mean, what is our definition of hell? Hell is, I mean, a lot of people probably have different definitions of hell, but I think the general consensus is it's unpleasant, to put it lightly.
Hmm.
So that is available. And then heaven,
Hmm.
probably a lot of different definitions of that. I think we can all agree. Extremely pleasant. That is available.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I come back to what I was saying before about the idea of freedom.
Hmm.
What if heaven was the only choice?
Hmm.
Are you free? What if hell was the only choice? Are you free? No.
Mm.
So this is a place of true freedom and great variety from, at least from a frequency perspective. And I think we as beings, and this exists beyond, the confines of these what we consider to be normal experiences here, especially in this time in the planet, we're experiencing a shift in that. A lot of people are awakening, and things that used to seem like fairy tales have become very real to a lot of people. And that will only continue to accelerate within the experience. Um, and, and I also want to like articulate that like I don't think that it's about giving ourselves over to God as in or the Holy Spirit or whatever it is as if it's this intangible thing, meaning that like things here, this reality, the physical things and our interaction with things here, like that's where hell is, and then heaven is in this other place, which is this thing we can't see or smell or taste or touch or hear. That's that's not true. It's and I think Bashar says this really well, which is he says reality is fundamentally meaningless.
Mm. Mm.
And so if you look at this and you say hell, you are correct.
Mm.
If you look at this and you say heaven, you're correct. If you look at this and you say boring, you're correct.
Mm.
It just so happens that within the mechanism of how things are created and our sort of piece in the puzzle and the piece in our own life experience and our own free will in which to make decisions and decide where we focus, it really is a game of momentum. And so,
Mm.
and you'll notice this actually, which is when we learn to train the mind to just focus on the Holy Spirit or God, or I could say just the frequency of love or the frequency of authenticity or the concept of itself. These have been like things that I have trained myself a really long time to do because I don't want to be at the whim of I don't want the environment to control me. I want to be able to go in and go, okay, maybe intellectually I want things to be different right now, but I don't want to sit here feeling like garbage today because I know that's just going to recycle and manifest another scene that feels the same way, in the coming days, in the coming weeks, in the coming months. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to get so good at being satisfied.
Mm.
I'll stare at this wall. I don't give a fuck. I don't need anything. I'm going to stare at this wall and be completely fucking in love. I'm so in love. I'm so in love,
Mm.
you know? And then comes a certain time where you've done that for like 3 days and you're like, okay, I'm bored.
Mm.
It's really difficult for me to get back to that initial feeling that happened in the beginning because it's natural for things to progress and it's natural things to pick up momentum.
Mm.
You know, we didn't, some people came here with the intention to be like trees and be space holders and sit and meditate forever. A lot of us and most of us didn't. And so these are tools that allow us to help articulate our direction. I always like to use the metaphor of a train station, which is like once you're on the train and it's chugging along, if you're like, oh shit, this is the train headed towards the cliff and there's a bunch of hooligans on this train and it's a bad train. I need to get on another one. You can do some Mission Impossible shit and like get on the roof and like jump to another train. Like that's really hard,
Mm.
really extreme. So what do? You go back to the station. How do you do that? It's the stillness. What I was talking about, this practice of contemplating, looking at God within, looking at whatever, it could be God, it could be just the frequency of satisfaction, of relief, of love, whatever it is you think you're lacking, you know, the fulfillment of that and feeling that within you without it.
Hmm.
And then eventually that's going to pick up enough momentum where you're in the train station, you've come to stillness, and then you're like, shit, I'm getting on the love train, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
But here's the thing is like you never get on the train, you're just sitting in the station and they'll be like, well, there goes another one, there goes another one, there goes another one. That's not as satisfying. It's you're already here. We've already like, why do we keep I'm realizing this in real time. It's like, why do we keep waking up every day? Because we already bought the ticket, which is like, oh, you're here because you want to live it.
Hmm.
You're here because you want to live it, or you want to live the essence of it. And so the denial of that, especially in, people on spiritual path, let me deny all these things. Like, I guess that's what people, some maybe that could be considered bypassing, but maybe that's not the right word. But that's just that that is an attempt to ignore.
Hmm.
You're ignoring and stifling your actual desires, um, because you don't believe that they're possible. You don't believe you can live them,
Hmm.
which has been a big part of my spiritual journey when I'm coming back around to, which is the kind of the reason I had my awakening was because I started to get a bunch of things that I really wanted.
Hmm.
And then one of them turned out, well, they all kind of turned out to be kind of a nightmare
Hmm.
because they all ended up, instead of feeling good, I felt really bad and really stressed. So I decided to just implode all of them and just like lay down and look within, and did that for many years. And then after many years of like, being in Sedona and Mount Shasta and running up on the mountains, I was like, at this point, like the only, if I keep following this current trajectory, the only logical next step is like just to get on the spaceship and never come back.
Hmm.
And I was like, that sounds cool, but also uh, there's still a world here, and there's still a lot to love in it, and there's still, um, you know, human experiences that I want to have, artistic experiences. So I've come back around to being like, oh, there were parts of me that felt wounded and maybe unworthy, and were afraid to admit to myself what I really wanted and like fully send it into that. And so that's really what this last year and then this the next year is going to be about, which is being like, oh, like for me, like, oh, I really want to be an artist, you know? I really want to like I really want to write my what I think are my great records, you know?
Hmm.
And because I just want to do that, you know? And that's a part of that's where I'm finding God. I
Hmm.
find it in everything and everywhere and everything and all the challenges, but that there's something about that journey which is like I don't need it. I don't need to grasp it, but I want to pass through it. Yeah. And that feels authentic. Feels authentic and it feels true. And so it's
Hmm.
almost like any suffering is coming from me either temporarily thinking that's not possible,
Hmm.
or temporarily denying the truth
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that's my authentic desire in
Hmm.
this lifetime.
Wow.
And everything will redirect me to that. And just having trust and not having trust in the sense that it's gonna happen, but just having trust in that like I'm I'm on the path, man. I'm living it, and I get to enjoy it every day. And there's so much to learn and and so much to be inspired by. And so sometimes even though it feels like nothing's changed, and there are like certain aspects of my old life which like I've given so much of my old life away, that I can look at it from the perspective that I have so little compared to what I used to have.
Mm.
It ain't like that at all. Yeah, it's quite the opposite. Yeah. So the nightmare
Mm.
becoming a beautiful dream,
Mm.
and that's already happened. I went from playing shows to feeling really stressed out to then doing harmonies and
Mm.
feeling like I'm, you know, frolicking through a meadow with all my friends. So fun. Yeah. So
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
all here.
Mhm. Thank you for that. I feel like I just got transported. Hmm. Especially the language of using trains that speaks particularly close to my heart.
Yeah.
Um,
Really? I
yeah,
love trains. So
so
I've
dude.
always loved trains.
Me too.
Yeah.
I got super emotional at this idea of, waiting at the station until a train you actually want to get in on comes. And I've had there's like this movie about the Apostle Paul, and he did all this bad stuff, and then he got converted and became a disciple. And then when he passes away, he wakes up and like kind of looks like just like the desert. And then so now he's in the afterlife, and all the people that he massacred uh come running up to him, welcoming him. It's just like, oh, but then he looks, and Jesus is like walking over the hill coming to greet him. And it's just like, oh, like waiting for that train of unconditional love to pull into the station so that I can get on that one. And it's just this like how many trains we've been on, and how many trains have not been the right ones, and how just sitting and being still and at the station, and yeah, it brings it all back to this movie Hachi, also about this dog that waits for his owner that passed away to come back on the train. He never does um until the dog is ready to die, and then he has the visual of the owner coming back on the last train. But that's super powerful. And then you get on that train of unconditional love, and you just ride through all your remaining desires, and it just carries you to everywhere you could have ever wanted to go and more. And the whole time, like I can imagine these yogis and these saints, they're just like sitting on the train of unconditional love. And it's taking them through extraordinary experiences, and all their desires are being fulfilled, and all the meanwhile they're not freaking out about it. They're, have great company, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, and yeah, I just think of no, sorry, the autobiography of a yogi, where Lahiri Messiah gets called into the mountains to meet Babaji, and Babaji creates this golden palace out of nothing and was like, "This is your last human desire, to be in a golden palace, and are you done yet? Like, this was your last one. Are you ready, like, to snap out of hopping on all these different trains?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then he snapped his fingers. He opened his eyes. The palace was gone, and it was such grace. But yeah, that's like getting all you want and then realizing it's not what you want, and then giving that up to get what you really want, and accepting that for what it is, but then also receiving that grace of having that option and that opportunity to start again and get on a different train, one that feels more aligned, that feels more fulfilling. What a beautiful journey. What a beautiful thing this life is. But I do want to recognize, I want to hear from you what you're offering right now, how we can follow you, keep in touch with you, and yeah, if you have a service or something that you've been working on that you want to share with people, now would be a great time to share that.
Sure. Yeah. I do have an email list, so maybe we can put a link or something for people to sign up for that. That'd be
Sure.
awesome.
Yeah, great.
Um, yeah, any social media is great. And what I'm offering now, I have two courses.
Okay.
One is my own Banah Winn method belief work,
Hmm.
um, which you've done a little bit of.
Mhm.
And it's basically a belief work method that ties beliefs to where they're located physically in the body.
Hmm.
So both bridges the ability in which to identify and understand beliefs and then trace them back to where they're in the body and then shift them. It's actually fairly simple, um, but when you actually pluck things up from the root, there's fundamental and profound change in the way we show up in the world and the way the world shows up for us. It's like you're basically like changing the 0 point of the reflection, instead of just working within stories. Same thing. It's like, very similar to the metaphor with the train station.
Hmm.
Basically, like the train station is like the place of choice, and so really learning how to work with that, and our beliefs, and so you're not just sitting there waiting, and the same trains keep coming by. You know, you could just be sitting there waiting, and it's the crap train that keeps coming by. It's because there's beliefs in there that keep sending the same ones to you over and over again. That's really learning how to shift those within ourselves, um, which actually changes the fundamental, the pragmatic and fractalized structure of reality. You know, we're a piece of this web, and when we change our piece, then we basically enter into either a new web experience or we completely break it and go into total freedom, which is kind of the experience of nothing, which can be very freeing and quite scary for a lot of people sometimes. But that's where you can create anything you want. And the other one is an extension of this, which is intuitive and psychic development.
Hmm.
And this course is really for anyone on their journey, whether you're someone who is just incredibly practical and pragmatic. It wants to learn how to understand your own intuition and just make better decisions. You know, I think that Jeff Bezos said he like if he made one good decision a day, he considered it a good day. So, you know, even people that aren't necessarily in the spiritual realm, but just want to make better
Hmm.
decisions and this is like essential to being like a high achiever, high level human, which is like the fundamentals. How do I make better decisions? Period. Is like the most profoundly empowering subject
Hmm.
among all subjects. It doesn't matter if you're an athlete, an artist, an entrepreneur, anything. How do I make better decisions? Period. Is the most important thing. Okay, there's that. Or if you're someone who's like on the other end of the spectrum, who's like super woo woo, wants to learn how to channel or like make contact with like multidimensional beings or ascended masters and and tap into these higher states of consciousness. It's basically a fundamental um, foundation building 4 part course that will teach you how to do that. And it acts as a circuit. So basically, once you learn the 4 skills, then you can start to repeat them with any and everything in your life. And then basically, it's not about that you won't ever have challenges again, but you basically have a really simple formula how to tackle and understand and move through any challenge.
Hmm.
So, what I've experienced, both in clients and myself, is one, people change. Like I've seen people's personalities go from disempowered to completely empowered,
Hmm.
and then literally like start a new life. And for me personally, it was the biggest thing I noticed initially is that it expanded my willingness to move through fear.
Mm.
And at least for a time, it expanded my risk tolerance that I was willing to take. Like I was willing to, talk about like full embodiment of really going for what you want. Why do we not do that? Because we're afraid that something is going to, I don't know, annihilate us or something like that. So I think fundamentally just working at the core, at least in my own journey, my own story, is doing a bunch of things that years ago I was terrified of doing and never would have thought of doing. And then I did them all. And now that naturally extends into, okay, let's take that deeper into the things that like what do you really, really want? What do you, what are you afraid of that if someone or something says no to it, it'll be the most devastating thing. Okay, let's go straight for that because everything is belief, you know? So yeah, so those two courses are really about that. Um, yeah, and an extension of that is I've been working with people one on one too, but I sort of leave that out for now. So yeah,
And so social media, your newsletter will include below. Where do these courses live right now?
they're on my website,
Yeah, great.
banahwinn.com. Yeah, there's a whole section they can check out there. That's all four of my offerings on there. Um, yeah,
Wonderful. Well, Banah, this has been insightful, thought provocative, enlightening, wonderful to spend time with you in this context. Thank you so much for sharing your presence and your gifts and your love in the world. It is going to make such a difference for everybody that hears this, and as an extension of everybody that hears this, and ripple and ripple and ripple. That's what you do, and we're so grateful for you. And we love you, and we hope to see you another time as a guest on the show.
awesome. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for having me on here, and thank you for the good work and just yeah, just your presence and who you are and your heart. And thank you for your heart.
Keep being extraordinary, and have a great night. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and remember to check out banahwinn.com. All right, see you in the next episode.